When we talk about surrender, it's impossible to ignore the role of vulnerability. Vulnerability is that raw, unguarded space in us where we admit what we don't know, where we own our fears, and where we acknowledge the parts of life that scare us. It's not comfortable. In fact, it can be downright intimidating. But this is precisely where surrender begins. The power of surrender starts to unfold when we're willing to step into this vulnerable place and face ourselves without any masks, without any shields. It's a choice to show up as we are, uncertainties and all, and ask, what if I just let go of the reins for a moment? What if I allowed myself to be led instead of always leading? Embracing vulnerability isn't a sign of weakness, as it's so often misunderstood to be. Instead, it's one of the most profound acts of strength we can commit to. It requires courage to admit that we don't have all the answers, that sometimes we feel lost, or that our best laid plans didn't turn out as we'd hoped. Vulnerability in this sense is an invitation to trust in something greater than ourselves. By stepping into this space, we open ourselves to the possibility of divine guidance, to answers that might not come from our own intellect, but from a wisdom that's beyond us. This act of vulnerability also allows us to let go of the notion that we must be perfect or in control at all times. When we're vulnerable, we're allowing ourselves to be human. We're accepting that we have limitations, that we can make mistakes, and that it's okay to feel afraid or uncertain. This is where the path to surrender truly begins. Vulnerability makes room for us to listen to our deepest needs and fears, to recognize them without judgment, and to say, I'm willing to release control and let something greater hold me. In this space of vulnerability, we become softer. We stop pretending to be invincible, and instead we invite grace into our lives. Grace and vulnerability means we stop seeing ourselves as solely responsible for every single outcome. And we begin to see that it's okay to let someone else, especially God, take over where we feel we can't. And it's here in this open, honest, unguarded place that we find the truest power of surrender. Releasing control is an act of surrender that asks us to let go of our tightly held grip on life, our plans, and the outcomes we so desperately try to manage. Control often feels like safety. It feels like a structure we can lean on, a way to ensure that life will go as we want it to. We plan, we organize, we strategize, all in an attempt to build a sense of certainty. But life is rarely as predictable as we'd like it to be, and clinging to control is ultimately a heavy burden, one that keeps us from moving freely and limits the potential of what life can actually become. When we hold on to control, we limit our view to our own expectations and beliefs, often missing the subtle, powerful ways that life may be guiding us towards something richer and more fulfilling than we had imagined. Our control can create tunnel vision, making us cling so tightly to our ideas of success or happiness that we end up resisting the very changes that could bring us closer to what we truly desire. By trying to control every outcome, we box ourselves in, keeping our lives small and predictable, when, in reality, life is inviting us to experience a vast array of possibilities and to trust in something far greater than our own limited perspective. Letting go of control is not about giving up or ignoring responsibilities. It's about recognizing that we are part of a bigger design. It's understanding that while we may have plans and hopes, there is a deeper flow to life, a rhythm that is beyond our control, yet always moving us toward growth. Surrendering control means trusting this flow. It means saying, I'm doing my part, but I trust that there is a higher wisdom at play here. Releasing control opens us up to be guided, to adapt, to learn, and even to receive blessings that we couldn't have orchestrated on our own. This act of letting go can feel like stepping off a ledge, but in doing so, we allow ourselves to be carried. It's a liberation, a release of the tension that comes from trying to micromanage every detail of life. In letting go, we begin to understand that the world doesn't rest on our shoulders alone. We realize that the weight of our lives isn't something we were ever meant to carry by ourselves. This freedom of release allows us to experience life more fully, with less fear and more trust, because we are no longer fixated on how things must go. Instead, we open our hearts to how things can go, trusting that they are unfolding for our highest good. In the end, releasing control is about faith in the unknown, faith that there is a divine plan working itself out. even if it doesn't always align with our timeline or our idea of what is best. When we release control, we make room for grace, for the unexpected, and for a wisdom that is always moving through us if we allow it. It's a powerful step into the flow of life, one that reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength lies in letting go. Trusting in unseen forces is a profound act of faith. It's the willingness to believe in something larger than ourselves, something we may not be able to touch or prove, but can feel if we allow ourselves to. This trust is the quiet conviction that there is an intelligence, a guiding presence at work in our lives, orchestrating things in ways we can't fully understand. It asks us to release our need for concrete evidence and step into a space of surrender where we believe that we are supported, even when we can't see exactly how. In trusting the unseen, we acknowledge that there is more to life than meets the eye. So much of what unfolds in our lives, the people we meet, the paths we cross, the opportunities that seem to arise out of nowhere feels too connected, too purposeful to be random. When we trust in these unseen forces, we begin to see life as less chaotic and more intentional. We understand that there are layers of meaning and purpose woven into the very fabric of our existence, even in the moments that seem uncertain or difficult. This trust allows us to let go of the constant worry that we have to figure it all out alone. This trust in the unseen is what allows us to dream beyond our immediate circumstances. It encourages us to hold space for miracles, to believe that life's magic doesn't just exist in fairy tales, but can be part of our reality. When we trust these forces, we stay open to life's possibilities, understanding that there are answers and solutions that haven't yet materialized but are already on their way to us. It's like planting a seed in the ground. We don't see what's happening beneath the surface, but we trust that with time, growth will occur. In this way, trusting in the unseen is an act of patience and faith, a decision to believe in the invisible processes that are always at work on our behalf. To trust in unseen forces is to recognize that we don't have to bear life's journey alone. There is support, there is guidance, and there is love moving with us and through us, whether we are aware of it or not. This trust allows us to take risks, to move forward with courage, and to release the need to control every outcome. When we trust that we are connected to a greater source, we find peace in knowing that our lives are held by something vast and beautiful, something that always seeks to guide us towards growth, wisdom, and love. This trust liberates us, allowing us to live with more openness and gratitude, knowing that we are part of a divine plan, even when we can't see every step of the path ahead. Accepting imperfection is a radical act of self-compassion and humility. It's about letting go of the illusion that we must be flawless to be worthy, that we have to get everything right for our lives to matter. Society often tells us that success is synonymous with perfection, that in order to be valued, we have to avoid mistakes, look a certain way, achieve certain things, and keep all the messy parts of ourselves hidden. But accepting imperfection challenges this belief. It asks us to see that we are enough just as we are, with our flaws, our quirks, our fears, and all the rough edges that make us human. When we accept our imperfections, we open ourselves up to a more compassionate view of life. We begin to understand that being imperfect isn't a failing, it's part of what makes us whole. Life is beautifully imperfect, and our struggles, our mistakes, and our less than perfect moments are all part of our journey. When we embrace this reality, we free ourselves from the relentless pressure to always be better and instead allow ourselves to be real. This acceptance gives us the grace to learn from our experiences without feeling crushed by our imperfections. Accepting imperfection also deepens our relationships, because when we stop expecting perfection from ourselves, we stop expecting it from others. We become more understanding, more patient, and more willing to see people as they truly are. This acceptance allows us to connect on a more genuine level, unafraid to let others see our vulnerabilities and insecurities. When we're no longer hiding behind a mask of perfection, we create space for real, honest connections. We allow ourselves to be seen and loved, not for an idealized version of ourselves, but for the people we truly are. In this space, we realize that love and connection don't come from being perfect, they come from being authentic. In accepting imperfection, we find peace in the ebb and flow of life. We let go of the constant striving and start to recognize that our value isn't tied to our accomplishments or our ability to meet an impossible standard. Instead, we find value in our resilience, our courage to face challenges, and our willingness to be ourselves. Accepting imperfection doesn't mean settling or giving up. It means loving ourselves enough to embrace who we are, flaws and all, and trusting that our journey with all its ups and downs is enough. Through this acceptance, we begin to understand that our imperfections are often our greatest teachers. They help us build empathy, resilience, and kindness. They remind us to offer grace to ourselves and others. And in accepting these parts of ourselves, we let go of shame and invite in a sense of belonging. We come to see that we don't have to be perfect to be loved, to be worthy, or to make a difference. We simply have to be willing to show up as we are, knowing that our imperfections are part of the beauty of being human. Finding freedom and letting go is a transformative journey. It's the realization that holding on too tightly, whether to expectations, outcomes, or even past hurts, can become a prison, keeping us from experiencing life as it is meant to be. Letting go is not about giving up or abandoning what we care about. It's about releasing the attachments that keep us from being fully present and free. When we learn to let go, we start to experience a profound lightness, a sense of peace that isn't based on everything going exactly as we planned, but rather on our ability to flow with whatever life brings. Letting go asks us to release the illusion of control. It's a humbling acknowledgement that while we can make choices, set intentions, and work towards goals, we ultimately can't control every outcome. By releasing this need for control, we open ourselves to a wider range of possibilities, and life itself becomes less daunting. We stop seeing unexpected changes or detours as threats and start seeing them as opportunities to grow, to adapt, and to discover new parts of ourselves. This act of letting go invites us to trust that there's a rhythm, a larger order to life, even if we can't always understand it. There's also freedom in letting go of the stories we carry about who we should be or how things should turn out. Many of us hold on to these narratives, letting them shape our self-worth and determine what we believe is possible. Letting go of these expectations allows us to step into who we truly are, free from the limitations of old beliefs or societal pressures. This process can feel vulnerable because it requires us to move beyond the comfort of the familiar and step into the unknown. But in this space of release, we find an authentic freedom, the freedom to explore, to redefine ourselves, and to experience life in its fullness. Letting go also involves releasing the past. We all carry experiences that have shaped us, some joyful and some painful, and while these experiences are part of our story, clinging to them can prevent us from fully embracing the present. By letting go of past hurts, mistakes, or regrets, we stop letting them dictate our lives and start creating new, open-hearted possibilities. This doesn't mean forgetting or invalidating what we've been through. It means honoring the lessons we've learned without letting them confine us. When we let go of the past, we find the freedom to choose who we want to be in the present, unburdened by the weight of what once was. In letting go, we also find that we become less attached to the future. We stop holding so tightly to specific outcomes, and instead we learn to find joy in the journey itself. Life becomes less about achieving and more about experiencing. The pressures, anxieties, and fears that once accompanied our goals begin to dissolve, leaving us with a sense of contentment and peace. We start to understand that true freedom doesn't come from having everything under control, but from trusting that we are capable of facing whatever comes our way. This trust allows us to engage more fully with each moment, to savor the here and now, and to appreciate life as it unfolds, imperfect and unpredictable as it may be. Ultimately, finding freedom and letting go is about stepping into a new way of being. It's about choosing to live with an open heart, unburdened by the weight of expectations, regrets, or fears. We start to see that life doesn't have to be controlled to be beautiful. By letting go, we invite in a lightness, a spaciousness that allows us to breathe, to be, and to embrace life with all its unexpected twists and turns. We find the courage to live more freely, knowing that we are enough, that life is enough exactly as it is. Listening for divine guidance requires a quieting of our minds and a softening of our hearts. In a world filled with constant noise and distractions, this can feel like a nearly impossible task. We're accustomed to looking outward for answers, seeking opinions, advice, and validation from those around us, believing that if we just gather enough information, we'll know what to do. But divine guidance doesn't often speak in loud or obvious ways. It moves in the subtle, gentle currents beneath our thoughts, and whispers that are easily missed when our minds are too cluttered or our lives too rushed. To listen for divine guidance, we must first create space for stillness. This is the art of tuning out the external and tuning into the internal. It's the practice of setting aside time to simply be, allowing ourselves to rest in the silence, free from the constant pull of our to-do lists and responsibilities. This doesn't mean isolating ourselves from the world or living in a state of constant meditation. It means carving out intentional moments of quiet where we can become receptive to something greater than our own thoughts. In these moments, we come into contact with the deeper part of ourselves, the place where divine wisdom flows. Listening for divine guidance also requires patience and trust. Answers don't always come on our schedule, and they rarely come in the form of clear instructions. Divine guidance often shows up in subtle nudges, gut feelings, or a persistent thought that keeps returning. It might appear as a sense of peace about one path and discomfort about another. This guidance doesn't always make logical sense, and it may not align with our plans or expectations. But when we learn to honor these gentle signs, we begin to see how they guide us toward choices that ultimately serve our highest good, even if the full picture isn't immediately clear. There's a humility involved in listening for divine guidance, a willingness to admit that we don't have all the answers, and that there is wisdom available to us beyond our own understanding. This humility allows us to release our need to control every outcome and instead trust that life is unfolding in ways that we may not yet understand. Divine guidance often challenges us to move beyond our comfort zones, to consider possibilities we hadn't thought of, or to release paths that no longer serve us. It asks us to be open, flexible, and willing to change course if that's where we're being led. Listening for divine guidance also means paying attention to the inner sense of peace or resonance that arises when we're aligned with our true path. This isn't always the easy path, nor is it free of challenges, but there is a distinct feeling of rightness, a quiet sense of assurance that comes when we're listening to that inner voice. It may not give us every step of the journey, but it offers enough to keep us moving forward with confidence and trust. In this way, divine guidance doesn't just give us answers, it strengthens our relationship with ourselves, helping us cultivate a deep inner knowing and a sense of connection to the divine. As we learn to listen, we come to understand that divine guidance isn't something we have to force or chase after. It's always there like a steady, patient friend, waiting for us to be ready to hear it. This guidance speaks to us in countless ways, in the beauty of nature, in the wisdom of a conversation, in a book that seems to find us at the right time, or in moments of quiet reflection. It invites us to trust that we are held, that we are guided, and that our journey is not random but deeply meaningful. Embracing courage over comfort is an invitation to step into our true potential. It's the choice to prioritize growth over familiarity, to lean into the unknown instead of staying within the confines of what feels safe and predictable. Our instinct is often to seek comfort. It feels like a warm blanket, a place where we know what to expect. But comfort, as soothing as it can also become a barrier that holds us back, keeping us from taking risks, learning new things, or stepping into the fullness of who we are meant to become. Choosing courage requires us to face our fears honestly. It's about acknowledging the discomfort of uncertainty and stepping forward anyway. Courage doesn't mean we're unafraid, it means we feel the fear but decide that the potential on the other side is worth the risk. This choice is rarely easy. The world we live in often teaches us that it's safer to stick to what we know, to avoid failure or embarrassment, to avoid vulnerability. But real courage lies in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, in showing up as we are, and in being open to whatever outcomes life may bring. When we embrace courage, we give ourselves permission to pursue our dreams and passions, even if it means stepping into situations where we might fail, be judged, or feel exposed. We recognize that growth requires us to stretch beyond our comfort zones, to push against our limits, and to take on challenges that demand more of us than we thought we could give. And while this path is often fraught with setbacks, it's also the path that leads to a life of meaning and purpose. Each time we choose courage, we are strengthening a part of ourselves that believes in our own resilience, our ability to adapt, and our willingness to keep going no matter the odds. Embracing courage over comfort also allows us to be more authentic. When we choose comfort, we often do so because we're trying to fit in or avoid standing out. But courage asks us to be true to ourselves, even if it means going against the grain or facing criticism. It's the willingness to live from our values, to speak up for what we believe in, and to pursue what feels meaningful to us, even if others don't understand. When we choose courage over comfort, we allow ourselves to live in alignment with who we really are. And that authenticity creates a life that feels rich and fulfilling. There's a freedom that comes from embracing courage. We stop letting fear dictate our decisions, and instead we start choosing based on what feels right, what feels true. This doesn't mean we become reckless. It means we learn to trust ourselves and to take risks with a sense of faith in our own abilities. We stop settling for less because we're afraid of what might happen and start reaching for more because we believe we're capable. We become willing to dream bigger, to pursue things we once thought were beyond our reach, and to live a life that feels deeply satisfying. Not because it's easy, but because it's meaningful. Each act of courage strengthens our ability to face future challenges. When we encounter fear or doubt, we can look back on the moments when we chose courage over comfort and remember that we've overcome challenges before. This builds a quiet, steady confidence within us, a trust that no matter what life throws our way, we have the courage to face it. Choosing courage over comfort isn't a one-time decision, it's a lifelong practice, a commitment to growth, and a belief that what lies ahead is worth the discomfort of the journey. It's the understanding that comfort may feel safe, but courage is where we truly come alive. In choosing courage over comfort, we create a life that isn't defined by limitations, but by possibilities. We stop living small and start embracing the full spectrum of our potential. We find purpose, resilience, and strength we didn't know we had. And as we keep choosing courage, we inspire others to do the same, creating a ripple effect of bravery, authenticity, and change. Trusting timing is a powerful act of faith. It's the understanding that life unfolds not necessarily on our schedule, but on a timeline that often transcends our own plans or expectations. It's easy to feel anxious or impatient when things aren't happening as quickly as we'd like or in the exact way we'd envisioned. We live in a fast-paced world that prizes immediacy and results. And there's often a sense of urgency to achieve, to attain, and to arrive. But when we trust timing, we learn to let go of that pressure, finding peace in the belief that things will happen when they're meant to, in the way they're meant to. Trusting timing invites us to recognize that there is wisdom in the waiting. Sometimes when we're eager for something to happen, a relationship to blossom, a career to take off, or a goal to be achieved, we can be so focused on the destination that we overlook the journey. But timing has a way of guiding us, preparing us, and refining us along the way. There may be lessons we need to learn, perspectives we need to shift, or inner strength we need to build before we're ready for the next step. Trusting timing means surrendering to the idea that there are things happening beneath the surface, things we can't always see, but that are necessary for our growth and fulfillment. When we trust timing, we begin to see that delays don't always mean denials. A pause in progress isn't necessarily a setback. Sometimes it's a blessing in disguise, an opportunity to recalibrate or gain clarity. There's an unfolding that happens in our lives, a rhythm that, while mysterious, often makes sense in hindsight. We start to realize that things didn't work out in the past, not because we were unworthy or because we failed, but because the timing wasn't right. With this awareness, we can release the fear of missing out or the feeling that we're falling behind. Instead, we trust that we're exactly where we need to be. and that life is moving us forward, even when it feels like we're standing still. Trusting timing requires patience and resilience. It's not easy to wait, especially when we have dreams or desires that feel urgent. But in practicing patience, we learn to cultivate peace within ourselves. We stop looking for validation from external outcomes and start finding contentment in the present. This patience helps us stay grounded and keeps us from acting out of desperation or settling for less than we deserve. It reminds us that life isn't a race and that our journeys don't need to be compared to anyone else's. We start to see our path as unique, unfolding in ways that are tailored to our growth and purpose. Learning to trust timing also deepens our sense of trust in life itself. When we stop pushing against what is and start accepting things as they are, we open ourselves to the flow of life. We begin to understand that timing is part of a larger plan, a divine orchestration that we don't always have to understand to appreciate. This trust allows us to let go of the anxiety, control, and need for certainty that often weigh us down. We find freedom in knowing that we don't have to force outcomes or manipulate circumstances to make things happen. Life has a way of bringing what we need exactly when we need it, if we're open to receiving it. Trusting timing isn't passive. It doesn't mean sitting back and waiting for everything to come to us without effort. It means doing what we can, taking inspired action, and then releasing the need to control the results. It's a balance between effort and surrender, knowing when to push forward and when to let things be. This balance creates a sense of flow, allowing us to move in harmony with life rather than constantly resisting or struggling against it. We learn to lean into the timing of things, knowing that every step, every delay, and every twist along the way has a purpose. In the end, trusting timing allows us to live with a greater sense of peace and gratitude. We learn to appreciate each season for what it brings without constantly looking ahead to the next. We start to see life as a series of perfect moments, each one leading us to the next, with its own lessons and gifts. We trust that what is meant for us will not pass us by, and that everything we're meant to experience will come in its own time, as long as we stay open, patient, and present. This trust liberates us from the anxiety of what might or might not happen, giving us the freedom to truly live in the here and now, fully embracing each moment as it comes. Growing through humility is a journey of self-awareness and self-acceptance. Humility invites us to recognize that while we have strengths, talents, and unique qualities, we also have areas where we need growth, understanding, and change. It's the understanding that we don't have all the answers and that, at times, our best intentions may still fall short. Humility allows us to see ourselves honestly, without the need for pretense or perfection, and it teaches us that acknowledging our limitations is not a weakness but a strength. In fact, humility is the gateway to true growth, as it keeps us open to learning, evolving, and becoming the best version of ourselves. Embracing humility means acknowledging that there is always more to learn. When we believe we already know everything, we close ourselves off from new perspectives and insights. But humility keeps us curious. It reminds us that every person we meet, every experience we have, and every mistake we make has something valuable to teach us. This openness to learning fosters resilience, as it allows us to adapt and respond to life's challenges with grace rather than rigidity. Humility teaches us to approach life with a beginner's mind, where each situation, no matter how familiar, offers us a chance to deepen our understanding and refine our character. Growing through humility also requires us to let go of the ego's need for constant validation and recognition. It's natural to want to be acknowledged for our efforts and to feel accomplished, but humility reminds us that our worth is not defined by achievements or accolades. It allows us to find fulfillment in doing what feels meaningful rather than what brings status. By focusing on purpose over praise, we become less concerned with how others perceive us and more connected to the values that guide us. Humility helps us recognize that our worth is inherent, not conditional. And this realization gives us a deep sense of peace. Humility also cultivates compassion, both for ourselves and for others. When we accept our own imperfections, we become less judgmental and more understanding toward the struggles and mistakes of others. We stop holding ourselves or others to impossible standards and begin to see that everyone is on their own path, learning and growing in their own way. This compassion creates space for forgiveness, connection, and empathy. When we see others through the lens of humility, we honor their journey without needing to compare it to our own. Humility frees us from the exhausting cycle of competition and allows us to embrace community and shared humanity. A humble heart is willing to admit when it is wrong, to ask for help, and to seek guidance. This isn't always easy. It can feel vulnerable to reveal that we don't have everything figured out. But in owning our mistakes and seeking support, we allow ourselves to grow. Humility breaks down the walls of pride and lets us access the wisdom of those around us. When we ask for help, we invite collaboration and strengthen our relationships. Humility reminds us that we are not meant to journey through life alone, and that true growth often happens in connection with others. Growing through humility also means celebrating the success of others without feeling diminished by it. When we see others thriving, it can sometimes bring up feelings of insecurity or inadequacy. But humility helps us understand that everyone's journey is unique, and someone else's success doesn't take away from our own potential or worth. Humility allows us to genuinely cheer others on, to support their dreams, and to learn from their achievements without feeling threatened. This mindset of abundance rather than scarcity nurtures a spirit of generosity and kindness, creating a life that feels rich in connection and gratitude. Humility is about letting go of the need to be perfect and embracing the reality that we are all works in progress. It's understanding that growth is a continuous process, one that requires us to remain open, grounded, and willing to evolve. Humility teaches us that we don't have to be flawless to be worthy, and that true growth happens not in the absence of mistakes, but in how we choose to respond to them. When we grow through humility, we build a life centered on purpose, compassion, and integrity, knowing that we are learning, growing, and becoming one day at a time. Celebrating progress rather than perfection is a powerful shift in mindset that allows us to embrace our journey without the heavy burden of unattainable standards. Perfection, while an alluring ideal, is often elusive and can leave us feeling inadequate, stuck, or discouraged. We live in a world that tends to prioritize flawless outcomes, and this can create immense pressure to constantly measure up. But when we focus on progress instead of perfection, we release ourselves from the need to be perfect at all times, and we create room to honor the small wins, the steps forward, and the growth that happens every day. Recognizing progress means acknowledging that growth is not always linear. There will be days of advancement and days of setbacks, but both are part of the process. Perfectionism, on the other hand, often expects a smooth and uninterrupted path, which can make even the smallest mistake feel like a failure. But when we celebrate progress, we give ourselves permission to stumble and still move forward. We stop viewing failure as the end and start seeing it as a lesson, a necessary part of the journey that teaches us, strengthens us, and prepares us for what's ahead. Focusing on progress allows us to cultivate gratitude for the steps we've already taken, rather than constantly yearning for a distant destination. It shifts our attention from what we haven't yet achieved to the ground we've already covered. Every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. It might be a new habit we've formed, a fear we've faced, a conversation we've had, or simply the courage to show up. Celebrating these moments helps us see how much we've grown and how far we've come. It reinforces the belief that every effort, no matter how imperfect, is worthy of recognition. When we embrace progress over perfection, we give ourselves the freedom to enjoy the journey. Life becomes less about reaching some future milestone and more about experiencing each moment with intention and purpose. We learn to savor the process, finding joy in the effort, the learning, and the discovery along the way. Perfectionism often robs us of this joy, making us fixate on outcomes rather than the richness of the present moment. But by celebrating progress, we remind ourselves that life is not just about the end goal, it's about how we evolve, how we stretch, and how we show up day after day. Focusing on progress also fosters self-compassion. Perfectionism can be cruel at demands that we do more, be more, and achieve more, often at the expense of our own well-being. But when we choose to celebrate progress, we shift from self-criticism to self-encouragement. We stop judging ourselves for not being perfect and start appreciating ourselves for trying, for taking action, for being human. This compassionate approach creates a positive feedback loop, where the more we acknowledge our progress, the more motivated and empowered we feel to continue. It's a cycle of growth that builds momentum and sustains us, even on the days when the road seems tough. By celebrating progress, we also shift our perspective on success. Perfection often feels like a distant, unachievable goal, but progress is something we can touch, feel, and experience right now. It's an ongoing process that brings us closer to the person we want to become, even if we're not there yet. Success, then, is not a final destination, but a series of milestones, each one worth honoring. When we focus on progress, we start to see the many ways in which we are succeeding, even when we're not yet perfect or finished every effort we make as part of the unfolding of who we're becoming. And that in itself is something to celebrate. Celebrating progress also enables us to be more present in our own lives. Perfectionism often keeps us focused on the future, on what we need to do next, on what we haven't accomplished yet. But by celebrating progress, we become more attuned to the present moment. We recognize the beauty of the current phase of our lives, and we take time to appreciate the work we're doing now. This mindfulness helps us enjoy our experiences more fully, even when things aren't exactly as we imagined. We come to realize that there's value in the process itself, and that the joy isn't just in the destination, but in the unfolding of our lives, step by step. Ultimately, celebrating progress over perfection frees us from the tyranny of unrealistic expectations and opens us up to a deeper sense of fulfillment. It invites us to honor our humanity, to appreciate the effort, and to acknowledge that the journey is as meaningful as the destination. By focusing on progress, we create a life that feels more expansive, more joyful, and more aligned with who we truly are. We stop waiting for perfection to give ourselves permission to celebrate and start celebrating the journey as it is beautiful, messy, imperfect, and full of progress. Celebrating progress over perfection is a transformative mindset that allows us to embrace growth, imperfections, and the journey itself. It shifts our focus from unattainable ideals to recognizing the small, meaningful steps we take every day. This approach fosters self-compassion, gratitude, and resilience, as it encourages us to learn from setbacks and honor every effort, no matter how small. By celebrating progress, we free ourselves from the pressure of perfection and cultivate a life full of joy, self-acceptance, and continuous growth. It's a reminder that success is not a final destination, but a series of milestones worth appreciating along the way.